All right. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to Better Products in Less Time using cross-functional teams. So we're going to be talking about the ins and outs of a cross-functional team, what it is, how it works, and more specifically, why and how utilizing a cross-functional team produces better results than a specialized one. We're going to do a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, but if at any point you'd like to ask a question, feel free just to drop it in the chat and we'll try and address it in the moment. To get started, the people you see in front of you are all members of cross-functional teams. We put together a little cross-functional team on this call. So what I'd like to do is start with having everybody introduce themselves, talk about their role, and talk about just a little bit about how that role fits in on a cross-functional team. And let's get started with John Moore. Let's just get it rolling.
All right, hey everybody, my name is John Moore. I'm a principal consultant based out of our Oklahoma City office. I'm a business analyst. I'm also the BA practice lead at RSI, so I manage the practice overall. The simplest way I can describe how the business analyst supports the cross-functional team is we're more or less the glue that holds the team together. I look at the position kind of as servant leader, the paid position. So, our job is basically to walk on a team day one and say, how can I help? And whatever the answer to that question is what we'll go ahead and do and make part of our job. And primarily that as a deliverable that ends up being requirement solicitation, documentation, user stories, but just and then in general, spending a lot of time facilitating communication between the team, the client, whoever needs to be catching up to make sure we've got the right people connected.
Very nice. And Lindsay.
Yeah, hi, Lindsay Giudice. I am on the strategy team here, product strategy team here at RSI, and my team kind of flexes into a couple of roles. One's on the discovery end and on the delivery end. So on the discovery end, you might see us doing setting strategy, exploring different avenues of strategy, finding the right customer, the right problem solution fit, product market fit type things. And then on the owner end, product owner end, on the delivery side, we might actually be running those backlogs, working with the delivery team to actually ship product. So we kind of sit in a bifunctional role.
Great. And Sean?
Hi, I am Sean Murray. I am a software engineer, and what I do is actually write the code, but what I do would be useless without all of the rest of the people in this call who tell me what the right things to do are and how to do them and how they should look and how the customers want them. So I, again, would be nothing without everything you're going to hear for the rest of the people.
Nice. And Matthew?
I'm Matthew Wonke. I'm a principal consultant and the quality engineering practice lead for our Wisconsin dev centers. And on a cross-functional team, my job is to verify that what the team is building is working the way that it's supposed to and validating with folks like John and Lindsay that we're actually building the right thing.
Yes. And to introduce myself, my name is Joe Delacqua. I'm actually pulling double duty today. I'm moderating the conversation, but I'm also representing the design side of things. When we talk about design, we're referring to UX design. So not just making things pretty, but getting in terms of usability and accessibility, making sure that the user's needs are being met, understanding what those user needs are, and working with literally this group of people to do just that. So that's our panel. To start off with, I want to talk about how we get where we're going. That's a lot of the big themes that you'll hear us talking about is how do we know where we're going and what are the steps that we need to take to get there? So to start off, just throw it out to the group. Why does a cross-functional product development team do a better job than a specialized one? Why do I want to go cross-functional?
Sure. So a cross-functional team has various disciplines. We've kind of run through that in our introductions, right? And those varied skill sets will help us more accurately define the work and identify what we want to build. And then it's also going to shorten the feedback loop as we build things, right? Because as we learn through customer feedback or stakeholder feedback, we have to make changes, right? And the more able the team is to address that in a short fashion, the faster we can get things out to the customer.
Nice. Nice. One of the things I like to think about is looking at a product holistically. right, looking at the product as a whole, looking at the experience, and the people on this call, the roles represented in this call, can help look at things, all the way across the board, all the way from what is it supposed to be, who is the audience that it's supposed to serve, how is it going to do those things, right, and does it do them well? And a lot of times in those kind of traditionally siloed approaches where you see specialized teams, there's a lot of difficulty in communication between those different segments, right? You've got the development working heads down over here and product working heads down over here, and then maybe if we're wise, we bring in QA at some point to the process, and VA is doing their work over here. And that communication really breaks things down, and we get huge waterfall style delays as we're trying to pass things from one workflow to another. And for me, that's one of the reasons that cross-functional works so well from a design standpoint, is we get everybody looking and moving in the same direction.
Joe, if I could jump on that.
Yeah.
There's kind of another piece to that the communication one, I think, is one that folks are kind of familiar with, right? Like the silos make it hard for us to communicate. Silos also hinder our ability to problem solve effectively and design good solutions for our customers. There's this idea of cognitive entrenchment, right? I know what I know, I'm good at what I know, and therefore I solve problems based on what I know. And so what that often does is that leaves out everything that's outside of my basic understanding of the world, and often leaves great solutions on the table that likely are better than the one I have. And so, by forming a holistic team that is cross-functional, that has different backgrounds, different skills, we are more likely to come to a better solution, or a more holistically thought out solution. We're more likely to identify the problem that we're trying to solve, and we're more likely to find a better minimum viable product that we can put in someone's hands more quickly. And we're probably better at learning from the MVP, right? When we put it in someone's hands and we get feedback, we have different ways of thinking of the world, and we're more likely to hear different things and solve problems more quickly. I think there's a little bit of that too.
That's a phrase that we hear a lot.
The language, by working with people like Matt and Sean and John, I learn their words, and sometimes we have the same word that means two different things. So I'll say something and John hears one thing, but Matt hears another, and I hear a third thing, and it's all the same word, but you just learn each other's languages, and it makes it faster to delivery, because the more we work together, the less we have to translate for each other, because we kind of have an understanding of what we mean.
Speaking of those words, John mentioned MVP, which is something that pops up a lot and means different things to different people. Lindsay, can you talk a little bit about exploring an MVP and what that means from a cross-functional standpoint?
Yeah, well, so MVP is kind of a fun word because it's minimally viable product. But what does minimal mean, and what does viable mean? So what does what's the purpose or the problem we're trying to solve, and what's the smallest slice of that? Generally, what we're trying to learn from an MVP is the fastest learnings in the shortest amount of time. And that's for all of us. So we might be looking for the fastest way to get feedback on a feature, but while they're doing that, they're also, Sean on the development side is probably looking at performance issues, or is the database structured right, or something like that. There's different things that we're all looking for out of an MVP. And really, you can build an MVP for any of those purposes, or a combination of them.
Sean, can you talk a little bit about that from the development standpoint, and what does an MVP look like on your side?
The MVP is, from a development side, it's really important that it is solving a user problem. Like, you can release things that nobody knows about in the background. You can release things incrementally, but the really smallest chunk of viable product is something that solves a problem for a user in your software.
Nice, very nice. And I find that working in this type of environment, you get a better view of not only what those problems are, but how to solve it, right? As a designer, and like John was talking about with his cognitive entrenchment, right? When I'm a designer, everything's a design problem. I can put a loader in there, and then to work with an architect to have there and say like, well, we could actually just make it go faster, Joe. It's a very important conversation to have that doesn't work in that siloed environment. So another thing that we really benefit from cross-functionally is this idea of verifying every step of the process, right? You have to verify, not only is this solving the problem, but does it work at all? Matthew, can you talk a little bit about how, when you bring in QA into this process, and kind of how that verification process looks?
Yeah, I mean, I think something we'll talk about later is this idea of shifting left, right? So the idea is to get folks like QA and business analysts and folks involved as soon as we possibly can, right? And start laying the groundwork for, making sure that we're building a quality software solution, right? So that looks like identifying your quality strategy, getting test cases out there, making sure that our acceptance criteria are clearly defined, things like that. And then if you want to get really fancy, you can start talking about things like in-sprint automation and things like that, depending on how tightly coupled you get with the developers on the team.
Nice. In terms of that validation, Lindsay, do you want to talk a little bit about how we understand what the problem is as a group? Like what tools do we have in our box to understand what we're making in the first place?
Yeah, sure. So we can use a number of tools. So some of them, just talking to customers is the biggest one, listening, seeing what they're doing. So there's some under the hood tools you can use for things like that. There are things that do screen tracking, things that do clicks and analytics and such in the application. They're also just good old fashioned talking. So interviewing them, sitting with them. And if you can't access them, going through sales team or through the support desk, things like that, to be able to proxy listen to customers. And then there's all sorts of analytics on the engineering end of finding error logging and things like that. So, but how we find the problem that we're solving is just a mixture of research tactics and just listening to customers, and also kind of anticipating their needs ahead of time. So
I found that when we talk with clients and we say like, yes, we would like to do this research, and we'd like to look at your analytics, and we'd like to do all of these things, the question that always comes up like every time is, that sounds great. How long is that going to take? Like, that feels like a lot. So let's talk a little bit about how long is it going to take, and why do we want to do this cross-functionally? Yeah, who wants to get us started?
I mean, I'll kick us off here. One of the supposed benefits of Agile is that we iterate over things, right? So a cross-functional team or not, we're going to build out a little bit of work like an MVP, and then we're going to listen, we're going to iterate over it, and we're going to continue to sort of add to it over time. In an Agile environment, a waterfall environment, doesn't matter. In a siloed team, we still have those same issues we just got done talking about, right? Where we are missing context. We're not necessarily being objective in the way that we assess the challenges in front of us. We are assessing them based on our own skills and knowledge. So one of the nice things about building a team this way is we are better able to objectively assess and estimate risk. So, and I'm sure Sean and Matthew both can hit on like estimating their work, so story points and that sort of thing. But what those things often lack is effort. And when we say effort, it's not just how long does it take me to do it. Do I know the unknowns? Do I know if there's volatility involved that may cause my work to take longer than I thought it would? Do I know how complex it is? Is it relying on something else? But from a cross-functional standpoint, Matt and Sean can weigh in, Lindsay and I can weigh in, Joe can weigh in, and suddenly we've got this more holistic view of risk, which allows us to make better, smarter roadmaps. Our projections are better, our timing is better. But to do that, and I'm going to take Joe's job for a minute and throw the ball to Matt, we have to shift left and include people earlier. So I'll take Joe's job and throw it to Matt if he can expound upon that.
Yeah, we already talked about it a little bit, but it's the idea of getting folks involved earlier in the process, right? In the estimations, in working with the client, like Lindsay is doing, getting in those meetings and asking questions myself to make sure that I'm understanding the problem we're trying to solve, and I'm thinking about performance ramifications, what we're going to build, or security ramifications, things like that. And I'm sure Sean can chime in here as well with similar things that he look at as well, right?
Yeah, it's there's like a well-known like graph that floats around, right? That the longer it takes to find a bug in your code, the more expensive it is to fix. So when you find it in production, that's a real big problem. If you find it in QA, it's a little bit less of a problem. If you narrow all this stuff down at the very beginning of the process when you're still crafting these stories, that's where the idea of shifting left is the most powerful.
Yeah, shifting left is one of those phenomenal buzzwords, right? Like it's popping up more and more and more. And it is that idea, right, of bringing people earlier in. If you're looking at a timeline, you're just going to take all of these people, these very talented and skilled people, and we're just going to move them to the left a little bit earlier in the timeline. Yeah, Lindsay, you want to talk about it from your side?
Yeah, well, it was the sometimes even when you're looking into DevOps transformation or things like that, where you're trying to get that more holistically shifting left. We can see even infrastructure. Sometimes there's a reason to bring them in, because if the network doesn't scale, or if the server box is too small or whatever, like how do we address those things early on? And really what it comes down to is your roadmaps. If they're time-based, they're not going to be reliable unless you're doing this, because you're not mitigating those risks early and often. So, if you're not there, you can probably use a now, next, later instead of an actual timeline. But really, if you're leaving all those risks on the table, then like Sean said, they're going to get more and more expensive to resolve as you go.
I think, Joe, an important distinction that we should probably make here is when we talk about shift left, we don't mean waterfall. Because we've talked a lot about moving people earlier and planning and assessing risk earlier. We're not saying we want you to do waterfall and plan everything up front and then design everything and then build everything and then test everything. We just mean include those individuals earlier in the process so that they can weigh in as we work through the process. We were joking as we were planning for this, right? If I dig that process in waterfall, I might design something and then not work on it again for 6-8 months till I actually see it again. I've got an 11-month-old. 6-8 months for her, she's a different human being, right? Yeah. And that's kind of a good way to look at a project, right? In 6-8 months, it's not the same project anymore. So I thought it was important we maybe put that distinction out there too, because we're talking a lot about planning and that upfront piece, but that doesn't mean we want you to do it all upfront. We just want to include those individuals earlier.
It's a great call out. A lot of people, it's a perfect call out. From the design perspective, there's very often this idea that you want to get your designers in there up front, have them design, do their thing, and then get them on their way. And I know that on the product side, there's that kind of mentality sometimes also of like, no, we need you for a couple of weeks to figure this out, and then you can go do something else. The thing about that is we don't get the opportunity to pivot and evolve with the project as the project grows over those months to become a totally different person. You want to maintain that input throughout the Agile process. So we make a big push on the design side to have an embedded designer, not just at the beginning, but throughout the lifespan of the project, so that as things change and as things grow, that we can pivot with them. It also means that everybody else gets to start earlier. If you're not waiting for product and design to go figure it out, then we'll call it developer, right? So again, bringing everybody in at the earlier part of those conversations just has a ton of value.
Well, and a big trap I've seen, at least on the design side, is you get this really cool design, and then folks like Sean take a look at it, and it's like, this is really, really, really hard to do with the tech stack that's been selected for this project. Like, yeah, we can build it to look like this. It's going to add 50%, 80% more time to get the work done. Is that really the path that we want to go down? Does that really get us to the minimum viable product?
You nailed it. I think that's one of the best things about having an architect developer at the beginning of the conversation is we can hold up, scratches on a sheet of paper, and I can say, Sean, is this real? Right? Is this something that's doable? And with his understanding of the tech stack, there's always a, yeah, no, or maybe Joe, you could pull that back just a little bit.
And it's important that you're, like you said, involved throughout the whole process, because you get halfway done with something and you're like, oh, we have to pivot. That's not going to work the way we thought. Give me some more scratches, please.
So just keeping an eye on the time, moving to kind of our last section. So I'm a client, right? And I'm all bought in. I think cross-functional teams are great. What do I need to do as a client to make sure that my freshly minted cross-functional team is effective? Sean, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so we kind of touched on this just now, but it's important that you have all of the right people, because you can get just one developer to write your website, right? If you want your website to look like websites in the late 90s and be slow and not very pretty and maybe miss a lot of the requirements that you really needed. So one of the really big things you can do, and I'm going to ask Lindsay to talk about, is a lot of discovery ahead of the project. Before you bring in a software engineer and have them sit there for a week, not really knowing while you figure out what to do, there are steps you can take ahead of time to kind of figure that out. If you just want to talk about that real quick, Lindsay.
Yeah, sure. And we have advanced teams that come in and do those sorts of efforts where, like I mentioned earlier, we're kind of setting the strategy, making sure we understand and can translate customer types, customer markets, what's the problem we're trying to solve, what are the sometimes the design requirements, things like that, like what's the workflow that they need to follow, the jobs to be done that they need to accomplish with this piece of software. And we really nail some of that stuff down for the project, at least an initial V1 of it during that period.
Nice. Just continuing to go around, Matthew, when you're getting started, what do you need from your clients?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing as we're kind of trying to identify these problems is access to the stakeholders, access to the subject matter experts, right? Make sure we have access to the folks that can answer the questions that we're going to be asking to try and uncover the unknown and assess the risk and come up with a plan to deliver the project.
Nice. John, what about you?
I mean, for me, it's clear decision-making criteria in the sense of autonomy that sort of comes with that. Like, we've hired and built this cross-functional team for their, particular sets of skills. Instead of trying to drive them to do, exactly what I say, instead give them clear criteria with which to make decisions and let them make them. So, and I'll take a minute. I want to tell this story because I think it's a good example. Joe and I actually worked on a client together, I don't know, Joe, a year ago at this point. And when we joined, the project was in trouble, was struggling. And one of the first things that we did was try to figure out what is the decision-making criteria for this application that they've asked us to build. And ultimately what we determined was the sales application for a salesperson to go into a customer's home and sell them a product using technology to show them what the product would look like in their home. When we came up with that, everyone was like, yeah, that's exactly what we want. None of the requirements, none of the conversation, nothing up to that point had been based around that. So it made it very hard, even for a cross-functional team, to do their jobs well because they were getting conflicting information. We have that mission, we have that vision, or just that thing that I can point to, that guiding light to say, okay, if it serves that, it's the right thing to do, we'll do it. If it doesn't, it's not, we'll do something else. Really, really empowers these types of teams to be successful because they have the rounded skills to do the work. They need that guiding light that they can work from.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. And I think that word empowerment is really important when you're working with a team like this. Stakeholders bring a lot of value, and they bring a lot of conversation, and they bring a lot of knowledge and institutional knowledge, and they can tell us all about the lay of the land. But it is important that we are also empowered to be able to say, well, here are some best practices, and here's what I'm getting from your users, right? Here's what they're actually telling me, or here's where my 20 years of experience is bringing, and to make sure that that voice at the table is also heard. If Sean is saying, guys, look, with the stack we have, we can't do it, but we can do it if we shift over to the stack. That causes a whole different level of conversation and assessment than just, a stakeholder saying, well, we're going to use this stack, right? That kind of openness and empowerment and really bringing us in as part of the team, I think is the places where I at least have been most successful is when it's more of a conversation as opposed to just like, you're going to build this app for me. Any other thoughts on what a client can give us? We're at about the 10-minute mark. I want to make sure we've got some time for Q&A. But any other thoughts about either what we need from a client or last minute cross-functional thoughts that we haven't touched on?
I will say from personal experience that you don't know how important some of these roles are until they're missing. It's not like having one software engineer and one product person will like double your speed. It will like triple or quadruple it, because just the amount of value and the consistency in resourcing is the difference is incredible.
I could not agree more. So now we want to open it up to the group. The chat is open and ready for you. If anybody has any questions, we're here to talk about it. Let's see what we got. Get my little chat window open.
Yeah, hey everyone. I've got a few questions here for the group. The first one is, I am not experienced in software development, so my question may not apply, but in manufacturing especially, SMEs don't have the expertise in the team and I have to call someone from outside. How do we involve them over the development time?
I can jump on this from having personal experience in manufacturing and in making this mistake. One of the things, at least from the business analyst perspective, and I think Lindsay probably would agree from a product perspective, that we try really hard to do is understand both business process, right? So the end to end, where does data start? Where does it end? What is happening, right? Because any application that we make is essentially a group of business processes that we're trying to automate or simplify. So I want to understand that, but I also want to understand relationally, what does that mean? So as an example, where does data come from? And at what point do I no longer touch it or care about it, so that I can understand sort of what is my tangential related scope that's not my scope. So as an example, I worked on a payroll project once upon a time where we needed to use payroll data to calculate sick time and do some additional math on it. I didn't touch time attendance. I didn't touch any of that stuff, but we needed to make changes to that. I needed to understand who those people were so they could give me some insight into what was coming, how I needed to understand that data, what any changes I made to that data would do to other folks down the line. And the same goes for when we spit that information out. So who was consuming it? Same thing. Is the information that I'm giving you in the format that makes sense, or am I going to give you something that's going to cause a whole other mess of problems unrelated to what I'm doing? So both the process itself, but also its relationships that it touches that you're not intending to change, but you could by accident. And I've done this in a manufacturing setting, and those people still aren't happy with me, and I don't work for that company anymore. Not for that reason, but they still don't like me, and I don't work there. So that tells you how bad I screwed up.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting is, you said that, you don't, or the asker, the questioner, said that they were in, not necessarily in software development, looking at it from a manufacturing standpoint. One of the things about what this group knows how to do is to understand how to know what we don't know, right? We are talented developers and architects and product managers, but we work with a wide variety of clients that do a bundle of things that are not that. So being able to find our points of information, understand who we need to talk to and how much of that information we need. There's a certain point where outside process becomes ones and zeros, becomes data, and it's like, okay, that's the part that's in our scope. And understanding the outside is helpful, but we need help with that, right? All of that external information that we're processing, I'm not going to become a manufacturing expert in the 6 months, even to a year that we've got together, right? We'll understand it, but we need those SMEs, we need that additional information to kind of help build our foundations. And then when you get into the technology and the delivery and the user experience of it, that's where you can lean on us.
Great, thank you. Another question we have, How long does it take to get up to speed in any of these roles outside of software dev?
Outside of software dev, that's interesting.
That's an interesting one.
So like,
I will
is
say
it a clarifying question? Go
I will
ahead.
say from the software dev perspective, what I do is a lot more technical and like you learn a programming language, right? But there is less direction and more, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from my perspective, a lot of on the job like training, right? Like it's a lot of experience-based stuff. There needs to be a kind of a hunger to like help a customer and just a genuine curiosity in how to ask questions and how to dig into things. And I think starting there, if you have those two things, it's very easy to move forward, depending on where your interests are. If you have an eye for design, maybe then you are a UX person who talks to customers and tries to help them figure out what their problem is.
Yeah, the fastest way I would say is to learn by doing. So if you're not able to do it on an actual project, build something, figure out if you can't code, do no code. But if you want to learn how to QA test stuff, build something that's easy, but then try to QA test it, or if you want to try to find a product and do a product market fit or some sort of strategy work, like think of an idea and then try to validate that, find a market for it, or listen to a market and see if you can find a problem there that needs to be solved is probably the better approach. But, just learning by doing, and everybody has different ways of learning, but that would probably be one of the quicker ones is to just try it.
This dovetails into another fancy buzzword really nicely, the quality mindset, which isn't really actually related to software quality, but the idea is learn something new every day, right? And it could be something small. It doesn't have to be this huge, like I'm going to learn Spanish today. It could just be I'm going to learn this teeny tiny piece of something that I want to learn more about. And I agree with Sean and Lindsay. I think getting in and getting hands-on experience is the best way to do it. Finding a mentor. There's a plethora of online tools available for folks that are looking to learn about these disciplines out there. Many of them are free, some of them aren't. There's a lot of places to go to get information.
But put a bow on it. I said this earlier and I'll repeat it. When all else fails, just ask, how can I help? Somebody needs help and get yourself involved just by helping and pick it up that way.
Question for the original question asker. Did that answer your question? Was that the direction you wanted to go?
1.5.
I'll let you know. I was going to say, I'll let you know if they respond.
Okay.
I think we've got time for about one more question here, maybe two. The next one is, what is the makeup of an advanced team and what might they do ahead of a full team?
Yeah, so typically we like to call them a product trio. There's typically a voice from product, a voice from design, a voice from engineering. And those advanced teams will think through, like I said, the market, the product, the problem solution fit, the product strategy or the initial MVP set of things, feature set, maybe that be included. And then we kind of spend time figuring out directionally how to get started on a project. So that's typically what we do.
Yeah, I am a big proponent of the product trio, but depending on how much unknown you have, right? If you're getting closer to, I think I actually know where I'm going. I cannot recommend making it a product quartet and bringing in BAs.
I believe the term is product pentagram, Joe, and there's 5 people on this call, and it probably looks pretty good.
And trio can be any number. It's like whatever is the right number for your group is the right set.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm gonna go off script and just talk about real quick, like the people on this call, the product pentagram. There's no way that sticks. It's because of what we're talking about, how everybody brings a different perspective. It's really valuable to get these folks in as fast as you can, right? Understanding the how, the what, the why, and the like intricate level of detail that can go into these things, the sooner the better. If you start with 3, you should get to this 5 within a couple of weeks.
Great, thanks guys. We've got one more question here. If you've worked on, let's say, project A previously and got a similar project from a different client, do you assign less time to completion, hoping to bring in all the lessons learned from project A, or do you assume same time previously estimated?
Always assume that you know nothing. And I'm not kidding. It is,
Yep.
There are, experience helps craft a response, right? Obviously, but there are, once you start digging into the minutia and like the specific details, the requirements, the security, the performance, all of it, always you kind of come in expecting the unexpected for a project.
Yeah, I want to jump on this one too. We actually have a tool for this type of assessment that a lot of our folks, at least in the BA practice, use. So even if you have experience in it or a similar experience, we try to, and I mentioned this earlier, objectively assess risk. So even if I estimate a user story as an example, and I have some experience in it, I may give that a lower estimate because I kind of know what I'm doing. But then we usually will tack on complexity. So how complex is this work? And again, my previous experience might help with that. How complete is my understanding of it? So I may know how to do the thing, but I may not know how to do the thing in the current environment I'm in now. My current client and my previous client are almost certainly not exactly the same. And then third, volatility, right? So what can I not control about my work today that might impact me, right? Is someone else working in the same space? Is there multiple teams? Is John in a bad mood and going to change the requirements on me? Whatever it may be. And that allows us to sort of be a little bit more objective in that. So like, yeah, I can lean on my experience and be better, but I can also force myself to think about the things I don't know and plan for them. So that, yeah, it might help, but it's certainly not going to knock out all those other unknowns like Sean mentioned.
All right, we've had one more question pop in, so I think we will do this last one and then call it a day. When a customer wants to define story points to hours, how do you translate or include level of effort?
So we're moving from story points to hours or trying to calculate hours?
I think it's the second one.
Yeah, the infamous, like, well, if
Yeah.
it's 2 points, that's 4 hours. If it's,
Yeah, I think this varies a lot based on whether your project measures for capitalization purposes as to how your accuracy may be, because if you're measuring for capitalization, your development team is likely already measuring the hours it takes to do things. And so every time you do something, you enter a guess, or actually some people actually track it time by time. So it just depends on the project. But basically having some sort of estimate, and we measure our accuracy at those estimates over time. So what I would do if it doesn't already exist is on my backlog, I might add a field to my work items that allows the developers or the team members to track their time. And then we actually put that on a chart somewhere, and we see like we do an original estimate and an actual time spent, and we measure that, and we measure that difference. We take that delta and say, how good are we at this? And then we can get better at projections over time. And if you're already doing capitalization or R&D type tax work, then you're already halfway there. But yeah, that's how I typically approach that.
It's also important to note that no two teams are built the same, so there's no way to account for effort across. It's something that you spend time and figure out with your team what your effort is and how that translates to hours. For sure, there can be a basis for it, but I wouldn't make that a blanket statement for all teams.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a reason that,
like a half day, like a Fibonacci 1 might be a day for some teams, and it might be 3 days for another team. So
yeah, there's a reason that Agile moved away from hours and estimating, right? Like humans are terrible at estimating time for starters, and an hour to me is not the same as an hour to Sean. Like that's the whole reason that story paint's cropped up to begin with, right?
So we'll typically also do that total over time to get ideal, right? So if I know my total initial estimate, I can even translate that into hours just based on regular math, right? 40 hours in a week times two sprints, 80 hours I got to work with. I can kind of do some of that backward math, but realistically what I'm looking for is what is my target? What is my ideal? How many points or hours do I need to complete in order to get the work done in the time that I've assigned? and then actual. So Lindsay talked about tracking actual. Now I can project, right? If I'm tracking actual against ideal, if I'm on that line, I'm great. If I'm trailing in either direction off that line, I need to change the plan. So it's not perfect, it's not a direct correlation to hours, but it's a way to project and make planning decisions, which I think is ultimately part of what you're trying to do with getting the hours.
All right, that was all of our questions. So I'll hand it back to you, Joe.
Very good. Perfect. We are right on time. So just I want to give a big thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate your time. And thank you to all of you watching. Great questions. We hope you found this valuable and enjoyed your time. And hopefully we'll catch you at the next one.
Thanks,
everybody.